right. When people ask me how I became commissioner, I don't really know, other than I know what my faith tells me, and that's not to proselytize. I just know what I feel like my purpose in life is, and I feel like this is where I am supposed to be. And I do listen because I can relate to what a lot of the families that have gone through are going through. So when Carol reached out, she said, "Are you willing?" And of course, I'm always willing. And she said, and I said, well, she said, "You can talk about personally or professionally what it means to be a stone catcher." So I'm going to touch on both because I do think that I am here for a purpose. And so, when I look back on my life, the first thing I thought about when I heard the word stone catcher was, just the biblical reference that I think many of us are used to. And if you're a person of faith, you've been raised to understand what that means. But the first thing that went through my head was, I feel like I'm in a family where there have been generations of stone catchers along the way. And one of the first things that went through my mind was I would listen to my father talk about just such abject poverty that he and his siblings and extended family went through growing up. And he would talk about his mother, my grandmother, who was very close to giving he and his brother and sister up for adoption, because when their alcohol-abusing father left them, he told my grandmother that she would never make anything of herself and she could never make it with those kids. And so I think about the people in my family that wrapped their arms around my grandmother and said, "You don't do that. You bring those babies back here and we will help you raise them." But helping raise them wasn't easy because my grandmother was one of 11 children. And there was just such poverty and struggle, but in spite of, they still chose to lift each other up along the way and try to see beyond the present and see what's possible instead of that present circumstance. And so I think back to my own childhood, and it was no cakewalk by any means. And you've heard so much about the adverse childhood experiences if you work in this space, and you know what that means, that household dysfunction and abuse and neglect and circumstances, depending on what your score is and what you've experienced as a child, society and science may tell you that your likelihood of being a success and having a healthy outcome in life is much compromised, including your life expectancy, your health outcomes, your career attainment, education attainment. And so I've done my ACE score, and it's 5. Which is not all that healthy. And so, for me, I think back to my childhood, and, I've got 2 wonderful parents, but life wasn't without struggle. And so, we were floating along. I've got 2 older brothers, and living what we thought was a very idyllic childhood. And then that kind of came crashing down. And, when I think about being commissioner, you get invited out to see a lot of places and do a lot of things, and I got invited to come tour Olaf, which is Our Lady of Peace. And that was hard for me, and it's still hard for me, because I remember visiting the halls of Olaf when someone very near and dear to me had to be there because of their own mental health issues. I am no stranger to some episodes of domestic violence in my childhood. Again, no stranger to mental illness and no stranger to poverty. And I do my own self-analysis of what triggers me and why. I'm also terrified of mice. And they're these little tiny creatures that you can kick out of the way, but they terrify me because they bring up a very painful episode in my childhood. So when my family was thrust into poverty and my parents divorced, my mother and my brothers and I found ourselves in what I describe now as a house of horrors. It was infested with mice, infested with roaches, and I would venture to say, had CPS, which it's funny how life comes full circle, and I'm now leading that agency, I would venture to say that if CPS had intersected with my family back then, we could have easily been reported for neglect and brought into state's custody because of environmental neglect, not for lack of love from my parents and wanting to better their circumstance, but life happens to each of us. And my mother graduated from high school and started college at the age of 16 years old. So, I know that there's a lot of judgment about people that fall on hard times. I'm a witness. Life happens to even the best of us. And so, we were invited into a house where the other four-legged creatures that lived there, or those that had multiple legs, made us feel like we were the visitors and it was their home. And so beer bothers me, the smell of beer. And it took me a while to figure that one out. I'm gonna be honest, it took me forever. It's like, why do I just get a reaction when I smell beer and don't really like it? Well, along with being thrust into poverty, came with struggle. And we survived, and I am proud to say that we lifted out. I feel like my brothers and I have gone on to achieve a level of success, and success more in the realm of being able to give back and pay it forward, and to have empathy and compassion for people that are struggling, to know what it is that they're going through, and to know the walk they're walking, and to know what it takes sometimes to build that resilience within to keep hope alive. But the beer came from the fact that we would go out and collect aluminum cans and take them to the recycling plant down in Louisville, so my mother had extra money so we could make it. It's funny, when I first walked in the halls of the L&M building as commissioner, it was a throwback, because I remember walking those halls as a child with my mother, who had to reach out for public assistance and needed food stamps, needed medical support for her children, and I remember the shame that she felt. I saw it in her eyes, how she had to swallow her pride to reach out for that lift up and that hand up. And so those weren't easy times, and trauma begets trauma, and those scars from childhood don't necessarily go away all that easily. And I can look at the generations in my family, I can look at my mother, I can look at my father, I can look at myself, I can look at my brothers, and you see how that plays out. And so for me, I was always very driven, because when I think about and I've had people ask me who know my story, and that's just a snippet, how did you overcome, how did you make it, where does that come from? And I do think it's from stone catchers and people along the way that helped to lift you. Whether that was people in my church, people in my Sunday school class, my teachers, my pastor, his family. I've been in the same church for generations, my mother's church, my grandfather's church, great-grandmother, you name it. So when you're surrounded by love and people that are lifting you up, it does make a difference in your life. But it wasn't easy, and so I again, very driven, went on, loved school, was somewhat of a geek. I did well, so that probably helped. But I did enjoy school also, and I was so driven to not experience the poverty that my family had experienced, and even with what we went through, when I listened to what my father and my mother talk about what they went through growing up, I was determined to at least achieve a measure of success where my children and I didn't have to struggle. And that hasn't been easy. So I'm traipsing along, went to Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, where winters are very harsh, but wonderful education, loved school. But I had my daughter when I was a junior in college. And it took me a long time. When people see my daughter and me out, they're like, oh, you all are sisters. And they've said it forever, especially because she's taller than me, and I'm really tall today because I've got heels on. But she's taller than me, and when I would hear that, it would evoke such shame, because I didn't have her when society tells you you should probably have a child. You graduate, you get established in your career. It was a shotgun marriage. My daughter's father and I had been dating, but fast forward in marriage and life happens. But it took me a long time, within the past few years, for me to look at people with pride and say, no, that is my daughter, and not to feel judged, because my story is my story and it makes me who I am. But it takes a long time to get there. So I know what it's like to be a single parent raising 2 children. That marriage didn't last. I had another child. Went on in a second marriage to marry someone who was a cocaine addict and alcoholic. I can tell you that I have probably been in every open NAAA meeting in the city of Louisville that you could ever want to go to. And so I know the pain of living through substance abuse. I know what that does to a family. But I heard so many stories in those halls. Again, trauma begets trauma is so real. And we are now divorced, have been for some time. When the layers of his story began to reveal themselves, and in listening to the stories of the men and women that would open up their hearts and talk about what drove them to addiction, 99.99999% of the time, it was because of pain or trauma in their own life. I know what my ex-husband's story is. That's not for me to share, but it was painful. And his journey that ultimately led him into abuse started when he was very young as a child. His way of coping with the hand that life dealt him, which was very much painful and very unfair. So again, I will say, while the marriage didn't last, he is 10 years clean and sober. Yes, 10 years clean and sober. It wasn't at all an easy walk to walk. Relapse is real. Hitting bottom is real. Again, all that you go through, the loved one of someone suffering, the myriad of emotions, you're pissed off, you're mad at God, you're mad at the person, you feel cheated, you're resentful, you're heartbroken, all of it. All of it. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, walked it for many years. So I do have much empathy for what the people that we serve. When you think about Kentucky's 4.4 million people and the fact that we have 650,000 families that need support to eat, that need support for food assistance, when you think about the 40,000 families that need cash assistance that are on the TANF program, when you think about the families that are on Medicaid that need a medical benefit, Kentucky has a ways to go in terms of getting really healthy and having and health in all areas, whether it's your physical health, your emotional health, your financial health. And I won't get sidetracked because I can go down a rabbit hole really easy, but that is why there is so much emphasis on lifting people into a level of self-sufficiency so that you can just make it. Because poverty is real and poverty isn't any fun. And nor is having to be on assistance. Because when I had my daughter, when I was a junior in college in Indiana, I had to go to Indiana's Human Services Agency and sign up for WIC and food stamps. And I remember the shame that I felt, which totally threw me back to what my mother must have felt. An educated woman, college at 16, graduated, and here we are. And I would go intentionally to other grocery stores, because that's when they had, not the card, they had the stamps. And heaven forbid you see somebody, because then you're like, oh my God, I just forgot something. Let me make a beeline and walk and go up and down the aisles with that card until no one sees you, because you feel such shame. So yes, I do take this seriously. And so now, and it does come full circle. It's funny because, whenever I do get to heaven, I got so many questions for God. Again, not to proselytize, so many questions, because I wanted a large family. If I could have been pregnant with children, love the babies. I've got a 3-year-old grandson who is the love of my life. Don't even care about the kids anymore. He is just wonderful. He is wonderful. Oh, he's precious. There is nothing like grandchildren. For those of you that have them, you know what I mean. It's a love that you can't even explain. My mother used to tell me about it, and I didn't understand it, but oh my God, I would move mountains for that little one. And the same for a 5-year-old goddaughter, who is like a second daughter to me as well. So I also know kinship care very well. My children have a little brother who's not mine, and I have practically helped to raise him. That 5-year-old goddaughter that I'm talking about, that's his little sister. She calls me Nana, but she could replace that for second mom, you name it. She has a permanent, she's at my house just as much as everybody else is. Let's just put it that way. So I know that it takes a village in this space. And so again, you know, I wanted house full of babies. That's not what was intended for my life. I have 2 children, but as someone said to me, I am the mama. So I have 8,676 kids that are in state's custody, for which I am the mama right now. And so that leads me to, for professionally, what does that mean? I feel like people look at DCBS and they think of us as stone throwers. They think that we just walk in wielding this inappropriate power to disrupt people's lives, to remove children just like that, to make it as difficult as possible. And it's not easy work by any means. I will tell you, I don't know how our frontline workers do it. We have an agency of roughly 4,600 people. Lena is one of our 4,600 Army that is here with me today. It's not easy work. I don't know how they do what they do, and these aren't easy decisions to be made. But when I think about all of the families that desperately need us to be stone catchers, it is those 8,676 kids for which we, the state, have had to take custody. And again, there are different permanency paths for each of those children. By and large, 60+% are on a path to reunify with their families. But we also have a responsibility there to ensure that we are connecting families to services. That's why KPFC is such a needed agency, along with all of the other behavioral health, mental health, parenting networks that are out there to help lift families. We have about 2,400 children who have a goal of adoption. We need adoptive families here in the state. When you drill that number down even further, of that 2,400, about half of those have had the termination of parental rights. It's not been found to be in the best interest of that child to be able to go back home. They need to find permanency, and they need to find permanency quickly. When you drill that number down even further, we know that of about that, 2/3 of that 1,200 number or so are on track. Usually we are fortunate enough to know that that foster family for where that child is currently residing, those parents are usually on path to become their forever family. But then we have over 400 children that linger in our special needs adoption program. And those 400 kids, when you drill down on those numbers, it's very disturbing. Some of them have been lingering in care for years. And Lena knows this more than I do because it's her division within the agency that deals with this day to day. Older male teens, and you all know the path. And then I won't even get into the disproportionality disparity issues because those are also very real. What children of color and children of mixed race are experiencing in the system, some of those statistics are very concerning. And we have a responsibility to ensure that everyone is treated equitably and fairly when they come into the system. Everybody has the same chance at hopefully achieving the greatest result. So the need is great. And so when, again, I think about the stone catchers in my life, and I think about why I'm here, you know, people constantly ask me, because it is wild. Anybody, hey, if you want, you can come be my shadow for a couple days. You would really appreciate just how wild it is. But I'm constantly asked, you know, people meet you and they hear what you do and they're like, oh, wow, wouldn't want your job. Oh my God, how do you do it? I love what I do. And I can say that with every ounce of feeling in my soul because I take this so seriously. Maggie said, when I sat down, she said, I heard a rumor. We almost lost you to Illinois. I said, it wasn't a rumor. You did. I was here for 3 years as a deputy, and I resigned prior to the election and the new administration. I was gone. And after the election, people started reaching out. Said, are you willing to stay? I said, well, and it's funny because the day I got the call, I had literally been in Illinois. I had been invited up to meet my new team the Monday after Thanksgiving of 2015. I was in Illinois. I had a close friend of mine who was in Baltimore, so knowing that I was going to start Illinois, January 4th was my start date, I wanted to take advantage of getting just a little bit of downtime before it became, you know, full-on throttle in Illinois. So I had flown from Illinois to Baltimore to visit a friend, and I was sitting in my hotel room that Wednesday when someone called and said, we've heard so many things about you, would you be willing to stick around? And I said, well, I'm willing to have a conversation. Because it was a done deal. I had accepted a position. As I said to Maggie, I was trying to decide what 500 square foot sky-rise box I was gonna live in and pay way too much for in Chicago at that point. That's really where I was. And, but I'm thrilled to be able to stay, but I stayed here not to push paper and not to be a figurehead, but to do no harm and to make a difference. And I will tell you, if for those that have the opportunity, Melissa's here, she knows because she sees it. Debbie was here. You have such dedicated people in Frankfort. I mean, I wish I could get out across the state and see all 4,600 employees that make up DCBS. My schedule doesn't allow it nearly to the degree that I would like. But if you saw the dedication and the passion of the people that are in this space, my hat goes off to them every single day. And so those are your stone catchers. I've got 4,600 of them, and all of you here in this room. And that is what we are trying to do, is just, you know, I had to present on our budget a couple days ago, and our job is to lift and protect. And if everybody would just reach one and lift one, just imagine what a difference this world would be. And so I will just close by saying, I have a near and dear friend of mine, Dr. Duncanstein, who, if you're a Louisville Cardinals fan, I am, we won't get into that, but he was recently awarded a Bell Award by one of the TV stations. And, you know, I've been in my church forever, so has his family, so they're all near and dear. And it was the first time I had seen him as emotional as he was when he gave his acceptance speech. But it was so moving. He gave tribute to his father, who passed away several years ago, but he talked about giving should be contagious. Giving should be contagious. And it should. And I will say, for as much as we may have struggled growing up, my parents always said there's always room left to carve off a little bit of what you have to help someone else. Thank you very much.